My name is Elana Rabinovitch, and I'm Executive Director of the Scotiabank Giller Prize. I am delighted to welcome you to tonight's event, focusing on the art and design of book cover art. I'd like to welcome tonight's panel, beginning with Kimberly Glyder, the artist behind Noor Naga's If an Egyptian Cannot Speak English. Joining Kimberly are Jennifer Griffiths and her book, We Measure the Earth with Our Bodies, by Tsering Yangzom Lama, Lisa Jager, the artist responsible for Rawi Haj's Stray Dogs, Ingrid Paulson for last year's winning title, Suzette Meyer's Sleeping Car Porter, and Crystal Sikma from Coach House Books with Lesser Known Monsters of the 21st Century. Audience, please feel free to use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to submit questions. They'll be put to the panel in the last 15 minutes of tonight's broadcast. I am as eager as you are to get to it, so without further delay, please welcome our panelists and their stories. So I'm a little out of my depth here tonight, acting as host, but this subject intrigues me, so I wanted to be the one to put the questions to you guys. I mean, we're always told as kids and even as adults not to judge a book by its cover. But tonight seems right for a discussion about doing just that, judging a book by its cover. What can a cover tell you about a book? What is a cover supposed to tell you about a book? The language of design. Obviously, different genres create or demand different font styles, different colors, different textures. How important do you think the cover of a book is in terms of attracting readers and in terms of the marketing of the book itself? I'm going to start with Kimberly, just because you're right beside me.
Well, I think we've always said that it's our job to get somebody to click on the cover thumbnail or to pick up the book in a bookstore. So that's kind of the point of what we do. We think about the book in terms of a visual object that people are drawn to. And we hopefully introduce them to the book enough that they pick it up and read about the book, whether it's on the inside flap or online. So that's sort of, I think, the way that I approach it every time I get a new project in. I don't know how you guys look at it, but that's what I do.
How about you, Jennifer?
Yeah, I think it's, a lot what Kimberly said. You're trying to give a hint, as to what type of book they might be reading, whether it's super literary, maybe it's romance, some books have obviously very key signifiers. Like if you're looking for romance, you're probably going to know what that cover looks like. And then others can be a little bit more mysterious. But I also like to argue that the book cover is not in the end the one that's responsible for the sales of the book, because we often get blamed when a book doesn't do well.
That's for sure.
So
Yeah.
I like to put that other side of the coin is we're there for the initial picking up, but we can't be responsible for everything.
That's a very good point. Lisa, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, to Jennifer's point, I think that, the book cover it helps us remember the book and visually remember it. And it's the jacket is that visual story that people are going to first connect to. And yes, we see things digitally first now. So that's an important thing about the book cover. It's going to be that first point of contact, I think, for a reader and draws you in. But yeah, ultimately it's the book that is going to keep the reader there and have them coming back to that author. So yeah.
To your point about the digital first experience, I mean, I wonder about just with the reopening of Barnes and Noble's bookstores, the whole real life experience of going into a bookstore and the way books are displayed, which I think must have something to do with the cover art, apart from the fact that publishers may pay for space, but the way that books might go together, certain colors, certain obviously themes. Ingrid, what do you think about this subject?
Well, I mean, I know that for many years we've been asked to consider the carousel on Amazon and Indigo on Barnes and Noble because and make sure that the type is very large and clear and there's a clear image and it's immediate. But what's happened, I think, now is that we have Book Talk and we have Bookstagram. And those people who are promoting the books that they love, they tend to show the actual physical copies. So we're sort of going backwards again. Because they're not showing just a little stamp. They're showing the small book, but they're showing like a three-dimensionality to the whole thing. So our job still has to be that it's recognizable, that it connects with the author to the audience. We have to leave clues in the covers so that they understand that it's the book that they want to read.
Wow, that's interesting. How about you, Crystal? What do you think?
Oh, I absolutely agree with what everyone said. Like, it's hugely important. And what I find really interesting is how it reflects like a larger kind of cultural conversation and fashion. We can look at times like trends in book covers and kind of see, you know, what's influencing them, whether it's like the big Amazon push, like has to be carousel thumbnail size, so big font, or whether there's like a moment of nostalgia, you know, kind of harkening back to more retro covers. So like covers also have their kind of own place along with literature in the culture.
It's interesting what you say about trends, because Omar Alakad in this or I think it was on The Current, was talking about how after All the Light We Cannot See by the author whose name Alan, somebody I can't remember, all the books that came out after that had the same sort of bluish grayish tint, walking
And
through
all the type.
The same type, yeah, right down the middle, yeah.
Well,
Because we're given that as a, I mean, you can all speak to that too, but when books become bestsellers or they do really well, we then as designers receive cover briefs that say, we like this book, we want it to look like this book, and your job is to try to make it look unique, but still kind of like this other book that fits into that style. So that's something I feel like I constantly battle with, to make my covers not look like somebody else's. And it's very interesting because when you talk about trends, we have to design these, you know, a year before they're put into production. And I always find it interesting when it comes out and maybe there's something that is similar, because it's not like you guys we were all talking in a room and then suddenly a year later you have, you know, 5 covers that have similar images or something. And that's interesting because we must be all seeing the world around us and taking it in and designing with that in mind.
So the collective consciousness to like how we trend things, like, because again, we don't share like our what we call comps or comprehensive designs that we promote or show to publishers.
Right.
We keep those to ourselves for the most part because we can't put those out there until there's the author's seen it, the publisher's seen it, everybody. Right. So a lot of times whenever I see any of your work, it's actually when it's already in print and suddenly it's like, oops, okay, everything looks very similar. I've done something very similar to like Lisa or something. So how did I do that?
I know, it's a cringe moment if that ever happens to you. You get really nervous about that. But for the most part, I'm also sort of amazed how much new work is out there that that's coming out, that's new trends all the time, because we are all kind of seeing the same things. I'm sure we all follow each other. I know we all follow each other on Instagram.
Yeah.
We're probably following all the same designers and artists and photographers. And so that's something that I think about a lot. And that's why you see covers have those trends for years, because we're getting those cover briefs that are telling us you need to make it look like this. And we're trying to do our own thing with it all the time.
Right, and to your point, to all of your points, you're trying to make it your own and unique, even with maybe a framework that's been given to you to copy or emulate what has come before. So that brings me to the next point, which is, what is the process in creating the cover art from, first iteration to final design? And I know we have some examples that I'd love to show about how some of these designs were arrived at. I think Ingrid
Right.
we wanted to show some of the evolution of your designs, and I know that Emma is going to share her screen and share those 2 slides with us. It's going to take there we are. This is
Okay. So usually with most books, I will be doing a lot of image research after reading reading the manuscript in whatever shape it's in at that time. But Suzette had actually found this image already. And actually she found the image on her previous book that I worked on. So it's very used to, she has a certain look that she wants, but this image was so perfect for the book that didn't really even consider trying to find something else. All I wanted to do was to figure out a way for it to evoke an era, 1920s, 30s, and also try to find something that would speak more beyond the image itself, because this is Sleeping Card Porter. There he has these moments of psychoses, almost like he's just sleep deprived, and he's worried about money. He's worried about being found out for being or homosexual, and all sorts of things are going on in his brain. So this is a very placid, lovely image, but we needed to find something else. So first off, we went and figured out that we really liked the type stray across with the kicks in the R, and we focused on that. And what I'd done was I'd actually found an image of a CPR, Canadian Pacific Rail, timetable for going across Canada. Unfortunately, it wasn't the right era, but I'd actually warped it and put it behind William, I think his name, what is it called? Yeah, Unapologetically William is the original artwork by Janet Hill. Anyway, I put it there, and Suzette was like, no, it's not the right era. She actually found the right one, and that's the second slide. If you want to put that up. So you can see that I actually took this timetable from 1920s going across Canada and sort of tried to make it into what his mind would have been like having to work sleep deprived, going across there, and just put it behind William himself, which not the character, but that's the name of the image. Or sorry, I'm getting things confused. The rabbit also I wanted to keep that there. So I put those 2 together and transposed them onto the cover. That's how I did it.
That's fascinating.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
I think we have another example from
That's
Kimberly about the concept of her book and the sort of evolution of the design. I know Emma's going to put that up on screen momentarily.
Yeah, so when I was approached about this book, I was told right off the bat that the author really loved this painting. Let me see, it's a painting by Jean Leon Jerome, I think. So I knew that I was going to work with the painting, and I guess I was just trying to figure out how I could elevate the design. So I think the author was interested in maybe pairing the painting with a kind of a more modern font. So you can see from sort of top to bottom, what I did was I tried the painting at the top by isolating the figure. Then I tried it as a full-blown image. And again, I did that on the right, but I tried it with a more modern, elegant font that's very unique looking. And then the author, I think, had also mentioned something about, I'm not totally remembering this correctly, probably, but I think the art director mentioned maybe trying a knife and peaches. There's a line in the book, and she wanted me to work with that. So you can see at the bottom right, I tried a photo and made it look sort of like an illustration, and then I carried the theme of cutting and slicing into the bottom 2 comps at the bottom on the left by basically cutting the cover in half and then using the knife as a device that would hold the painting. So it's just trying different ways of using this artwork. And any designer who has to work with art sometimes wants to try to elevate it. So this is what I was doing. I was just trying different iterations.
So why is it, why is it that in painting has him facing to the right and then to the left? Is that a series of paintings?
No, I just flipped the image. I think
Ah,
I can't remember why on the left, at that top, are you talking about the top left? I think I
Yeah.
liked the way that he was looking off on that one. So I had him looking that way rather than facing the left at that point. But we had an issue with this painting. We weren't sure if we were going to be able to reproduce it. So I was trying to actually, with that top left one, make the painting smaller in some way so that if we did have to reproduce it from a smaller image that was a lower DPI, that maybe we could get away with it. So that's why I did that one. And then in the other iterations, I was trying to crop it just ever so slightly bigger. And then at the end, we actually did get the image. So that's why you see it on the final, and we've cropped it by closing in on it quite a bit. And on the final, I kind of carried the theme with that slicing just on the left hand edge. And actually it kind of works as a device to hold the type for that winner of Grey Wolf Press.
Mm.
Because there was so much type on this cover too. And that was one of the issues I had when I was designing, was trying to figure out the hierarchy of everything.
hmm.
And then we went with a neon yellow for the final. And I think we embossed it as well. Let me see. Nope, actually we didn't. I'm holding it right here. But it's a spot gloss. And I think it's a nice juxtaposition between the classical painting and the very modern type. But this was one of those cases where actually they picked one from the first round and it didn't go through a lot of revisions. And that's always nice when that happens, as many of you know.
So Jennifer, we also have some clips from We Measure the Earth and how that sort of went through the paces that I think we can, this is We Measure the Earth with Our Bodies by Tsering Yangzan Lama. So talk to us about this.
Yeah, so it seems I'm getting a theme with these Giller winning authors that they're all very opinionated, because it doesn't always happen. Like, not every author comes to you with ideas right out of the gate. Sometimes they don't know and they just want to see what you come up with. Sometimes the editor has a very specific idea, but in the case of mine as well, the author, she sent a 9-page PDF with all of her ideas for the cover. And I believe both me and the designer for the UK cover got this, or all the publishers she was working with. So this cover you're looking at now is actually the UK cover, which I got. I can't remember if it was at the very beginning with the brief or just slightly after, but I had this cover in mind while I was working on mine. And it's, again, one of those things where we wanted our own cover because we were the originating publisher, but I don't want to do the same thing she's doing, but we're also working from the same brief. So we've got a lot of the same information. So it's just tricky trying to find your own take on, you know, kind of the same idea. But the author had a few things that she really wanted us to pursue. And the idea was like some kind of collage-y cover with Tibetan fabric. And then also the idea of mountains being, you know, very central to the story. So she was hoping to see those on the cover as well. So you can go to the next slide. So like on the left, this is like just a fraction of the outtakes. We actually went through a few rounds, not the most of any book I've done, but quite a few. The first round, I did these hands right away because even though I feel like mountains were maybe the obvious choice, I wanted to try something different. I wanted to go maybe more with the bodies aspect of it. And there was just, you know, the really beautiful way in which they pray, which involves like touching the ground, and it's a very physical thing. And I wanted to sort of convey that somehow. And then I also tried those two on the top right are both paintings by a Tibetan artist based in New York, Pema Rinzin. And he had a few different paintings that I really loved. So we tried those. And then I also, like, the bottom left was one of my first mountain ones I did. And I think we pretty early on, we abandoned the other Tibetan art. We wanted to stick with the fabric. They liked the hands, but they were concerned that Sarang wouldn't go for it because she really had this idea that she wanted mountains. So they were going to keep the hands, but like we went several rounds of like trying to get these mountains just right. And I really struggled to find the right balance with like the fabrics that I had initially were very busy and just trying to find like, so we kept paring it back. And eventually we got to those two on the bottom right, which I actually really like the black one with the mountains. It kind of matches the hand, so I ended up using it for the spine of the book, so I got to use that anyway. But one of the main issues with the hands, the first iteration, is I was sourcing my fabrics from like stock sites like Getty, and the origin of the fabric is like a little bit sketchy. Like it might be Tibetan, but it might also be Chinese, and it was very important that these were authentic. She also mentioned that she didn't want them to be like rich people fabrics, so these are like kind of gold and embroidered, and they wanted something that was you know, what common people would wear. So I found a fabric collector online. You can find anything on the internet. And he very generously let us use the images for free, which is really great, which doesn't always happen. Yeah, and then in the end, like initially we were supposed to do a flapped paperback, but there's this big issue with all these supply chain things these days where we couldn't do flaps anymore. So to make up for the flaps, I got to do a gold foil in the front, which is always really fun. Yeah.
I think you actually did a good job of evoking mountains like a cave and, you know, the sort of feeling of moving upward. So I think you captured that. I guess Sarang thought so too, because I just think it's far superior to the UK design.
Oh, thank you.
So congratulations on that. So I wanted to talk about another idea, and this is whether or not designers collaborate with authors. You talked about getting a brief from the author, and that seems a bit removed. Do you ever have the opportunity to sit down with an author and go through, like, face to face, or, you know, over the phone or something directly where you can actually talk about what their intentions are?
I usually try to keep a bit of a distance between myself and the author. And it's not because I don't want to talk with them and collaborate with them. It's because the purpose of the book cover is for a publisher to be able to promote it to the audience. And sometimes an author doesn't quite understand that because it's their work and they've spent years and years working on this, and it's their baby. And they want it to look as a reflection of them, you know, sometimes. So it is easier when I have the steps where it's through editorial or production through the publisher, in order to at least have them interpreting what needs to be happening. I've also had
I might be that interpreter.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Sometimes for
Yes,
you, Ingrid. Yes.
Crystal and I work together a lot. So Crystal
Yeah.
is, in fact, Crystal also designed the interior as well as, for Sleeping Car Porter. So
Yeah. Really just, you know, trying to match what is on the outside to be on the inside as well.
Well, Lisa, I think we have a clip
My favorite.
from because, you know, during our Between the Pages tour, we, you know, the audience members asked, the moderator asked about this idea of cover art, whether you like it or whether you loathe it. I mean, they never loathe it. Obviously, they've had something to say about it, but we actually have a clip from Rawi, who's the author of the short story collection Stray Dogs, talking about this very thing. So have a listen. No audio.
No audio.
I know it's there. All right, well, we'll get back to that. But essentially, Rowie said, I'll just spoil the surprise, but he said that, you just said, don't put any goddamn dogs on the cover.
But he's not wrong, because the title says stray dogs. And I think as designers, we ask ourselves, do we really need to put a visual of a title, when it's so clearly in the title? And I had done different ideas, a couple of different themes. There's a huge photography theme in the book, and I had explored that. But I think maybe even the editors felt like when they saw the dog, which originally had wings, that it was very relatable. And I think the other different thing about this one is it's stories. It's a collection of stories. And I think as a designer, you sit down, you think, how am I going to find an image that relates to every one of these stories? And actually Rowie and the editor did the work of naming it, the Stray Dogs title was a perfect title, and calling the stories a collection of, stuff that Rowie had written over the years, and he pulled them all together for this book, and it's a fantastic book. And yeah, so I had done a couple comps, but they ultimately went with the dogs.
I think we might actually have that clip ready now. I think
Great.
whatever the glitch was got fixed.
One of my conditions when I published the book, I told my publisher not to put dogs on the cover. And then they sent me the cover, and I was seduced by a dog, so I accepted it.
Sorry for the choppiness. It's just all Zoom's fault, but I'm sure everybody got the gist.
Yeah.
That was wonderful. I think, Crystal, you wanted to share with us a couple of links as well about
about the designer for Lesser Known Monsters. Here's the cover. And what I really like about the cover too is the back here. But the designer is Jaya Maselli. So I'm putting in the chat her website, as well as a short radio interview that she's on, where she talks about her cover design. So please do visit her website. She has so many incredible covers. She's the senior art director for Scribner in the US. And Lesser Known Monsters was unusual for us because we did a co-publication with Tin House in the US. So by the time we bought the Canadian rights, the book was pretty far along, and including having its cover. So we weren't that involved in the art direction on this one, but we had the opportunity to consider whether or not we would use this artwork, and of course, we love it. LitHub did a cover reveal article. I'll put one more link in the chat, where Kim, the author, described how she felt about it. And I'm just gonna read the quote because it really reflects how we felt. I love how interesting and balanced it is, how lush the colors are, how the long title zigzags and the other elements weave through letters. The frog and the wing are pulled the most literally from the stories, but every piece of the collage feels thematically dead on, and the way they form and deform the silhouette evokes just the right touch of body horror. I could imagine it calling to me from a bookstore shelf just as well as a tiny thumbnail on the phone screen. My wildest hope for the book is that it feels like it's bursting with stories, like the covers can hardly contain it, which is exactly what Jaya Maselli's design suggested. So this was one tack that was taken for reflecting a story collection, is doing collage. And so that's how this ended up.
I love that
the
whole
best.
idea about her stories like brimming over, you know what I mean? Like they're just bursting to get out, and somehow you found a way to contain them, but also expose that truth that these are important stories to share. So I was going to ask you about, how involved is the writer in the creation of the cover, but I think we kind of cover that in terms of the collaboration or lack thereof. So I wanted to find out if you guys, I'm sure you are approached by many a young aspiring artist and designer, and I wondered what kind of advice you might give to somebody who is interested in pursuing this field.
Well, I don't work in-house anymore, so I'm not seeing designers, but I have a lot of designers who reach out to me and students. And one thing I tell students is if they're not working on book projects in school is to do their own personal projects that are books so that they can have them in their portfolio. And when they go on interviews, they'll have book projects to show. So a lot of, if they can do their own self-directed personal projects to put in there. I did that for myself. I really wanted to pursue book cover design and I didn't take it in school. So I put some in my portfolio. In terms of how to get into it, I think, it is such a small, it feels like a small industry of a group of designers. Like, I feel like I know everyone here, even though I've met Ingrid, but we haven't, other people haven't met, but, and we live in different countries, but, it's because we all know and respect each other, and it's a good group. So to get in, I think, I recommend looking at the publishers and looking for entry-level positions and getting into it the way that you normally do in design firms. But you really have to love reading. That's one thing that I just tell people is that you're going to be reading a lot of manuscripts, and if you're a slow reader, that might be a problem.
You say manuscripts, these are already manuscripts that have been put through to the final stages. These aren't just like slush pile manuscripts. Okay.
No,
Well, yeah. I mean, when we get projects, they're usually not final manuscripts, and we're not allowed to show them to anyone. But I mean, I read all the time, and unless it's, a biography, or I don't mean to be mean to the biographers out there, but I don't always read all the biographies and not all of the very complicated nonfiction books I work on that are business and science. But, fiction, it's so important to read the manuscript when you can. And if you can't, it's really important to get a very comprehensive brief from the publisher. I know we veered away from how to get into it. I mean, other people can speak about that. But I definitely think loving books and being a big reader is a big part of being a designer in this field.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Does anybody else have a anecdote?
Well, I could say for myself, I am a bit more unconventional in how I've gotten into my own cover design. I'm here with Lesser Known Monsters, but I do quite a few covers for Coach House, and part of it has just been being there and learning and being in publishing in general. So having that love of books, having that kind of knowledge that you're acquiring as you're going along, being like fully immersed in that conversation. Like I put a LitHub chat link in the chat, and LitHub constantly has cover
Reveals,
reveals or covers of the month, and there are lots of resources online to be literate in that way. And then the other thing is that I think about we do work with freelancers, and the kind of there's Ingrid right there. Like knowing, I think you kind of touched on this, Kimberly, like similar to if you're going to submit a writing manuscript to a publisher, if you're wanting to kind of freelance with a publisher, like knowing their kind of their style, their vibe, being familiar with them. would be a way of,
That's a
that
really
would be
good point.
a
Yeah.
plus, yeah.
And the thing is that, I mean, Crystal, you say you come from an unconventional entry point, but like I went to art school and I was actually working in marketing and corporate design for a few years before I just ran screaming from it. And ended up in books. And I had to unlearn stuff that I'd learned in art school and also through corporate and marketing in order for me to get into sort of the emotional center of what has to happen with a book. And I also had to learn a lot more about typography, like refined typography, than I ever was taught in like the 4 years of type classes.
See, I always thought that I missed that in school or something, but it sounds like maybe actually you do have to kind of just find your way with typography.
Well, with book typography is different than when it's advertising typography.
Oh,
So like
yes,
with
of course.
covers, totally, you know, everything I learned there it applies. But when you're starting to face a page on the interior, it's a very different thing.
Yeah.
A lot of the more famous book designers that we know, like Peter Mendelssohn, he was a concert pianist. Here and Peter Cocking in BC, I mean, he's won more Alcuin Awards for book design than anyone else ever in Canada. And he was actually an English major. So
I saw Na Kim, who I love, is a great designer in the US, was a bartender up until for like getting into the job like fairly recently. I was, wow. Yeah. But also an artist. So that was kind of the entry point.
I think
there.
she was an illustration major, maybe.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. I did museum design before I did book covers. And I remember when I left that a designer there said, you're going to hate all that small type. You're going to run from all that small type. I don't hate it. I love it. But it was kind of like you're saying, I was sort of unlearning things I had learned, principles I had learned in museum design, where you have to create type that's a certain size and then apply it to, you design it on a small screen and then it gets applied to something that's very large scale. So I've gone from big to small. And then before that, I was a painting major. So I think you can bring all of your history into your work and apply it. Maybe that's what makes us all different as designers too.
I guess it's a little bit about the canvas, right? So whether you're working in a museum or on an 8x10 book,
color, form, composition, it's all the
right.
same stuff.
So I wondered about, we talked about this a little bit during our rehearsal, and you won't be beholden to this if you haven't, but I was curious to know if you have any sort of favorite book designs that you want to share with everybody, just so we can all see what a great work of art, apart from the ones that we've already seen tonight, might look like. And short of that, if you had any great book recommendations. So let me start with recommendations for beautiful, gorgeous book covers that you might want to share.
Well, right now I'm really loving Cultish by, I wrote it down, I have her book, Amanda. I've actually bought it for the cover and it's about language, but Cultish by Amanda Montell.
You have it?
It has a retro, yeah, I do actually. It's a HarperCollins book. I'm loving this.
The retro, yeah.
It's just a reminder of like, kind of breaking out of the box of what you might think a book about language would be. Anyway, so yeah, that right now I'm kind of loving that cover. That's my favorite. Did you mean other designers' work?
That's exactly that. I mean, I just, you guys are the experts, so we'd like to see what you think are, inspiring cover designs that you might want to, show the group.
I have to get it. Hold on.
I can start. I have a stack right here.
Right.
These are not necessarily my favorites, but I went around my house. I tried to pick ones that I both enjoyed the book and the cover, which is not always, compatible. I've bought a lot of books for the cover that I was disappointed in, but so it's just like it's in no particular order. This is a lot of the covers that I like are incredibly minimal because I'm never allowed to do that at work. Uh, so this is by Rodrigo Corral. It's for Cesar Ira. Really enjoyed that book, very cerebral. This is another favorite book of mine. I just love this
Love that
book.
cover.
And I love this cover. It's like embossed on the case. It's using a foil. Again, things I never get to do, but it's gorgeous. And then this one is also the bonus of just being, very
Yeah.
beautiful
Yeah.
inside. But yeah, definitely recommend that. This one is sort of to represent this whole series by Peter Mendelsohn. I mean, it's at this point, I feel like a classic, but I've always loved them. And I don't know if I could say I enjoy Kafka, but I usually feel like I'm holding my breath the whole time, but I did read it. And then this one, it's kind of too bad. This is the paperback version, which I feel like ruins the whole effect of this cover because you have all the quotes and the seals, but this is by Oliver Monday. And I don't know, there's just, I'm always drawn to the covers that are the most minimal, like a rock and simple serif type on a pink background. Very nice.
But hang on just one sec. I just want to get back to you, but I want to remind the audience too, to start, if you have any questions, start putting them in the Q&A right now so we can get to them once we're done this. This is fascinating. Keep going, Jennifer. Sorry.
I'll just end with one. This is one I actually haven't read, but I bought it for the cover. This is like from the 60s by Keith Cunningham, and I think it's amazing.
So cool. Okay.
Does anybody else have recommendations or, I think.
Yeah, that's why I ran away. Like favorite book covers of all time, that doesn't exist because I'm constantly looking and like anything in design, you're always building upon what you understand of the world. So, but this is the one that I really like. That's not Kim. Pure Color. It's Ellsworth Kelly painting, actually. It's been used. And weirdly enough, considering how minimalist this is, I've had a few publishers actually ask me, can we get away with a very large blob on the cover?
The new trend.
It's a new trend. So
It is.
I pulled just two from my shelf, and it'll tie into a book that I'll recommend reading. This one is the Clarice Lispector's Complete Stories. So I love what they did with the spine and the front cover. The font on the back a little bit less readable, but it's because I have the paperback. And along those same lines, for a classic woman author, is the Copenhagen trilogy, the American version by not Kim. It's so dark and unsettling, and I think it really beautifully reflects the memoir by Tove Ditlevsen, and I would also recommend this trilogy for reading.
Double whammy. Thank you.
Yeah.
I kind of cheated a little where I just found a couple online resources where they have a billion beautiful covers you guys can go look at. And I can put that in the chat if that
Please.
is okay. I'll do that.
That's a great thing.
There's a new website that just came out by a fellow designer, Zoe Norvell, who you guys probably are on there now. And it has like hundreds of covers. So I'm gonna just put in there.
So
I'm
going to ask you guys to put your book recos in the group chat because I want to be able to get to some questions. And we have somebody, Natalie Drack, who says, hello from Osoyus, and forgive my pronunciation or mispronunciation. She says, this is fascinating. My question is if you have to cite the source of the photo or the image you use as part of the cover design, i.e. credits or citations.
Yeah, always.
Yeah.
Always.
You also
And they're-
need permission.
Yeah.
Yes.
And usually,
Absolutely.
It's always on the back. You always put the well, this is neon, so you can't see it, but
I will
you
say
always
for-
have it on the back usually.
I will say for you, we put it in on the
Oh,
colophon.
okay, sorry.
the back
I'm-
page.
See, I'm the US person here.
Well,
But it's close.
Coach House is very bespoke that way. They want to really show that they're a printer and they make beautiful books. So they have a colophon, as well as
And you want to
copyright
touch
page.
the paper.
You wanna- yeah, you really want to touch the paper.
I understand.
So Anonymous asks, these are all fiction examples, I believe. What would the panelists suggest makes a great business book cover? Oh my.
Well, usually I've worked on quite a few business books, and one of the things is that it really depends upon how the book is being positioned. If it's about the author, for example, they're doing talking circuits and it's about their experience, you have a photo of them because they're promoting the book. And so the book cover comes back to them. If it's more of an ideas book, you really large type, assured, self-assured type, and an object. So you just try to find something that isn't a dollar sign, something that's slightly unique that can just blop onto the cover to attach the eyeball to it, basically, because you're going to find a lot of dollar signs on covers for business books, and it's not always going to, everybody just sort of glazes over. You try to find, like, if it's about waste at the office, then you like have paper crumpled up or a fritzed computer or something like that. You know, you just find like a little thing that sort of gets the joke almost.
I find those to be I actually find business books and a lot of nonfiction very challenging because you have to kind of get to the core elements, and they have to, they're very conceptual sometimes. Actually, they're kind of the hardest ones to work on sometimes. So like Ingrid's saying, there's a lot that you have to put into it. So those are actually, sometimes they're the most simple looking covers, but they're actually very difficult to come up with.
They're very difficult, and sometimes they rely heavily on type, and you're trying to make the type look very interesting and to tie in with, there's so many tropes and that you could easily fall into, and you try to make them different.
Yeah.
For business books or nonfiction. Yeah. Depends on the nonfiction too, like if it's self-help or business. Yeah.
Right.
Can have
Or
different
politics. So that
politics. It's all they are the hardest.
So Ewa, I'm sorry, wants to know what kind of, and this is a very good question, what kind of graphic design tools you use?
The Adobe Suite is how we put together all of our work. How we input it ends up being a completely different thing. It can be using just the type and images that we find through webs or image sites, custom photography or illustration that we commission. Also lettering ourselves, either on like an iPad or actually on paper and scan it in and manipulate. So there's a lot of different inputs, but it all ends up boiling down into Adobe InDesign for the layout itself, Photoshop for touching up images, and Illustrator for sometimes creating icons or manipulating text if you really want to have a lot of fun with it. So
a really good question here, maybe we can do this rapid fire style, is what are the 3 top designers to follow on social media? Maybe Jennifer, we'll start with you.
Oh, that's so hard because there are so many that I love, but I mean, everyone's mentioned Kim a lot. She's very hot right now. Her stuff is great. Rodrigo Corral is great. June Park is another one that I really enjoy, but I mean, there are so many.
When you have a chance, just drop them in the group chat.
Sure.
It'd be great. Anybody else?
Oh,
Yeah,
I hate to play
Kimberly
favorites.
Glyder.
I hate to play favorites with you. Thank you. I hate to play. You should go to that website I put in there because I mean, I could name a favorite design from every designer on there. I think everybody is really talented, honestly.
There's And a lot of them are on Instagram too. So yeah, if you're looking for names, like you can always just check the credits on, you know, on the
Yeah.
flap of a book, and
Yeah.
they're there.
Um,
I'll just say Jaya Maselli again.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, beautiful work.
somebody
Yeah.
wants to know, why are there different covers for different countries?
Mm.
Different
Why
markets.
is that?
Yeah.
It's because they have different markets.
Mhm.
There's basically, the UK has a certain sensibility around how they purchase books, what they're used to books looking like. If you're ever in London, for example, you go into the underground and there's book ads everywhere. And in Toronto, it's hard for me to find any, even in a paper. So like they have a different approach to buying books, to acquiring books. And so they have a slightly different history around how they deal with design. Design is cultural, first and foremost. The United States has a different look as well. Canada has a different look. Sometimes they blend.
And you'll see how Quebec has a different look too.
Oh no,
even
English
within
Canada, sorry.
Yeah,
English Canada
yeah.
and French Canada are,
Yeah.
You've never seen so many opposites at that point. The same cover in French and in English will not look like they're the same at all.
Well, even Australian versus UK, like they can change, even though they're both English speaking countries. Yeah, like
Yeah.
it's just the market and, you know, what they feel they can reach.
Do you guys feel, I kind of have felt like over the years, and maybe I've just been doing this so long, but too long, I don't know, a long time, that they're kind of all merging in a way. I feel like I'm seeing similar trends throughout all these different markets. I would say maybe 10 years ago, the UK market was very different. And now I think they're very similar to the US in a lot of ways.
Well, I think also
Yeah.
all of us designers through social media are following
Mhm.
each other. So there's a synthesis happening as far as
Yeah.
what our vision is.
Yeah,
So-
that makes perfect sense. I have one other question from Frank, who was formerly a print designer and wants to know essentially how many samples do you think a publisher would want to see in order to assess their work or hire them or have them on as freelance?
The rule of thumb is that you should always have no more than 20 pieces in a portfolio. So beyond that, it's just fatigue. So, and you always put the work that you want to work on, not the work that you think is necessarily the best. Because you're going to be judged and get jobs based upon whatever you put into that portfolio. So even if you thought you knocked it out of the park with the business book, if you don't want to work on business books, keep it out of there. So you
And
don't
if the
have to have-
publisher you're submitting to doesn't do
Yeah,
business
do
books,
business.
also,
Yeah,
I was
that's
gonna
also
say
out
it's
of
like what Crystal's
can-
saying. You should customize it to the publisher you're submitting to.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And even if you think you can design everything, I think Ingrid's made a very good point, like to pick the pieces that you love, because
Mhm.
it'll be a reflection of your
Mhm.
work, your best work.
Another
Mhm.
question from Pamela Goss. I'm just trying to get through as many as possible without like cutting you guys off. But this is, do you have like a file or a bulletin board or a Pinterest page where you pull ideas and scraps of images from?
Yeah.
I
I
tried it,
have
but-
one. I going back to Instagram, I save a lot of I have like a folder on Instagram. I save a lot of what I see. And I do look at a lot of things, but I actually sometimes don't want to look at a lot because I worry when I look at a lot that it's like what we talked about, where you're seeing things
Yeah.
and it might come into your work too much. So as much as I am on Instagram, I try to edit how long I'm there and just keep in mind what I'm taking in all the time, which is hard, but
Yeah, I think
I-
in terms of inspiration, when I'm seeking inspiration, I will look in all sorts of places. You
Mhm.
know, it could be, a walk outside.
Mhm.
It could be looking at a magazine or going out to stores or something.
museums.
Yeah, museums, whatever input I need, I will kind of seek that out. And then in terms of social media, yeah, just not looking at that too much, because yeah, it can be overwhelming.
Yeah.
For me, I find it
Sure.
overwhelming.
One last question from Anne Doyon, I think, wondering how you approach Indigenous book design. As more Indigenous people become published, how do you work with artists to convey the message of the book using Indigenous art, Indigenous language, typography of Cree, Salish, Ojibwe, etc. on the covers? So that's a really interesting question, I think.
Yeah, I can speak to a little bit of that. Like, we are actively looking for Indigenous artists. So that is definitely something we would love to hear more from them. And then in terms of working, it's I've worked closely with the editor and the author. So like Bob Canoe, I worked on his 2 books, and we worked closely with him, and we actively sought out an Indigenous artist and worked with him, like found an artist and worked closely. So it was a lot of feedback from Wob and to get it right. Yeah. So
There's also a thing with typesetting. There's not a lot of typefaces currently on the market that actually include all the necessary diacritics for some of the languages in Canada, particularly in the West. So you have to rely upon knowing what typefaces to find in order to use that, or relying upon hand lettering so, for a cover.
And for Coaches, we did an anthology called Indigenous Toronto, and we commissioned artwork from an artist named Mo. And so really the cover, which I designed, like the title and editors on, like it was about showcasing that art rather than, you know, like making the art the main thing. And then with White Mud Walking, which I worked with, did the cover for with Matthew James Weigel. So we went with, this is his drawing of the North Saskatchewan River, and we, you know, wanted to make it an object. So there's this beautiful foil, with some foil in the back, and then Matthew did a ton of work inside, and for typography went with Baskerville because it was the British Museum's guidelines. So he's pushing back against the archiving of Indigenous stories and artifacts, and he's using it in that way. And then so the font, I went with Social Gothic, which is a Canadian font and has this element of like kind of handmade a little bit to reflect that. So that's one thing.
That's wonderful. I think we're coming up to time. So I want to thank you guys so much individually, Kimberly, Jennifer, Lisa, Ingrid, and Crystal, for lending us your time and talent tonight. It was a wonderful, eye-opening, absorbing, fascinating, gorgeous conversation. Thank you again. For anyone who missed out on tonight's event, this video will be available on our website and on our YouTube channel in the coming days, so check back then. I hope to see you all back here on February 22nd when Tom Power from CBC Radio Q will host a panel on East Coast style storytelling. Thanks again for joining us tonight. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
thank you.